Good morning, everybody. Welcome to episode 8 of Anomalous America, New Mexico. Thanks for being here. Let's give some time for everybody to get in the channel. Good morning. Thank you for being here. Let's make sure everything's working here. All right. Beautiful. Yeah. Episode 8. Can't believe we're already on episode 8. Yeah. So, like I said, I wanted to finish off the Four Corners. There's just so much that's relative to one another in this area. And, I think a lot of people are kind of, that have been following along or seeing the um, correlations I'm making. And this region of America is incredibly ancient. And, you know, trying to kind of um, just let the papers speak for themselves and not necessarily um, attribute my own um, correlations, so to say. And but it's becoming incredibly obvious, at least in my opinion, that we're dealing with some civilizations that you know are thousands, if not tens of thousands years old, and several cataclysms have occurred that have you know buried the past, so to say. And I wouldn't say that people have gone to great lengths to hide these things, but in some cases certainly. And is it farther down the line here on my channel, I'm going to do um, I don't think it'll be a series. It'll just probably be, an hour or two show about the Smithsonian, the history of the Smithsonian, um, you know, the relic hunter that was Smith and what came of that, where the funding came from, kind of give everyone a little bit of a background. I don't necessarily think it was purely evil. I think this gentleman who inherited a substantial amount of money and was an absolute lover of history, um, it's like the Indiana Jones story. And we'll kind of make a narrative similar to that out of it. And, um, I think the Indiana Jones series is kind of a spin-off of a lot of um, kind of what was going on in America. And these articles are a bit of a backstory to that and substantiates that, I think. And yeah. Um, so if you haven't seen previous episodes, I obviously strongly recommend you go back and do so. That's important because we're kind of building a narrative here. From Alaska here to episode 8 in New Mexico, and I'm going to start off with an article that correlates the two together, and we'll kind of show um, what it is exactly that I've been saying for so long, about not only was the world in a singular um, type of atmosphere, weather, right? The whole world was tropical. And these civilizations were kind of an amalgamation, that there were tribes, there were wars, but there were far larger swaths of land that were um, of a similar people. And another really important thing for me, especially in the age of divisiveness and separation, and that race and skin color were not um, had nothing to do with each other in the sense that we describe them now. there was no division from race or skin or creed or anything. And going through enough of these now, from Alaska to Mexico to the Gulf of Mexico, you had all phenotypes. And, skin color is a recent invention or definition, phenotype, whatever you want to use to describe these different genetic distinctions, were allied and living alongside each other. And hopefully, some of you guys, Joe, Connor, Jillian, Question Everything, Flower Jones, thank you for being here. Hopefully, you guys saw the preview video. Warrior Emperor to Greenus, Atlantean King of New Mexico, because that's an important article. That article is going to be a bridge to a lot of what I cover in this show. And, we've touched on a lot of what that article represented in many of these states, especially California, also Arizona, Arizona. Remember, I posted the origins of the name of Arizona, and Arizona is the name of it. Arizona, like Ireland. And the Emperor Tigrinus is going to be an incredibly important correlation here. Thank you to one of my subscribers, Obedient to Yah, for making a wonderful connection with a Irish king. And we're going to dive into some of that. We're going to talk about Druids in New Mexico, the Irish of Arizona and New Mexico, the southern states, because there were some correlations in California as well. Someday we'll get into, maybe I'll do a whole series on Mu in Atlantis, Lemuria. Atlantis being the Gulf of Mexico, and Lemuria in the sense that I'm discussing, because obviously my focus is predominantly anomalous America, but we'll cover some other things too. But we're talking about Lemuria being California, the island of Cali, and Atlantis being the Gulf, or Florida, Cuba, so on, and perhaps the friendships and then eventual war that existed between these two parties. Yeah, Jillian posted the link, Atlantean King of New Mexico, the preview video for this video. It's one of my favorite articles of all time. The video is fantastic. I love it. It's a good synopsis. We're going to read a summarized version of that same article, just because I know, like I said, I talk about analytics, and seeing what percentage of people see these videos. It's very sporadic. So the percentage of people that see my preview videos and the percentage of people that see my full Anomalous America videos, there's a huge discrepancy. There's, generally 1,000 viewers that don't see both videos. So I will do a synopsis to start us off. We'll dive into the Druids of New Mexico. And then we'll get into some of the earliest articles from the 1850s. And again, you'll see the connections I'm making here, that the articles never really go too far back. And that's what makes the American Southwest so interesting in the 1850s, 1840s, late 1840s, is that you're dealing with an English speaking culture who's writing of new discoveries of a land long forgotten. Obviously there were, quote, Aboriginal people here, but what I'm been showing you is that these, quote, Aboriginals are standing on top of or inhabiting ruins of a previous race. And that not only are we dealing with a previous, quote, race, phenotype, whatever you want, whatever misnomer you want to use, culture, that they're on top of another buried culture. And it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And if you saw the Warrior Emperor Tigrinus video, you're going to see the timelines we're dealing with. That video, the the exploration party is digging through 3 previous civilizations to get to this other buried race. And that's kind of been what we've been touching on from Alaska to here, is that, 100, 200, 300, 400 feet in California, 450 feet below a lava flow in California, they're finding stone cities, perfect stone cities. And as we get along the Mississippi Delta, we're going to find the same thing, but there's not lava flows in the Mississippi Delta. So what's going on? There's been some incredible cataclysms in America, and it has never been easier to reveal a sort of narrative than it has been here, because of the recent time frame of uncovering all of this. You're dealing with, again, quote, Indians, Native Americans, Aboriginals of the Southwest, who, their history doesn't date back very far, and their oral traditions describe these ancient ruins incredibly well, that they inhabited the ruins that were there already, and they have no tradition or history or understanding of where they came from or how they came to be this way, and that often the ruins the places were in ruins when they got there 4, 5, 6, 10 generations before. So yeah, I think that's kind of a reasonable synopsis, giving plenty of people time to get into the chat here. Thank you again for being here, and hopefully everyone's enjoying the series. Again, comments, questions, please make sure you're posting them. I go through those all the time, every day, and it does help formulate and structure what I do going forward. So it means a lot. So don't forget. Um, my allergies are absolutely horrible. I've been outside consumed with baseball for like 4 days straight, and slept with the window open last night, which wasn't very smart. So I apologize for my runny nose, and got a killer headache this morning. So I'm going to be a little sluggish, but thank you everybody for being here. Where do we start? I think we'll do a quick synopsis of my Emperor to Greenus preview video. I'm going to go over an older version of it that I highlighted the things I found interesting. We can cover just some of the kind of headlines of that article. We'll then follow that into, the Irish lore, the Druidical lore of the area. We'll read some of the earliest articles I've found on New Mexico. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about Cibola. The ancient name before they called it New Mexico was Cibola. They called the region Cibola. I'm sure some of you are familiar with, the 7 cities of Cibola, the 7 cities of gold. The Spanish invested a large amount of money and many lives reaching this area. And they were, if you believe the narrative that made it to the truth, they were disappointed. There was no gold, there was no silver. But I'll kind of cast some light on why I think that is, and what was really going on, and that cataclysms had buried this race long before even the Spanish got here. And we'll talk a little bit about New Granada. This region was called New Granada, and why that is. But yeah, so let's do a little screen share here. Thanks again, guys, for being here. It means a lot. My Radium series, a full episode should be out on Friday. That's my goal. We got a doubleheader of baseball on Thursday, so we'll see how that goes. So I appreciate everyone being understanding of my schedule. That all that stuff's got to come first. But I'm loving the new Radium series. It's one of my favorite subjects, and everyone seems to be really enjoying it. And some of those correlations are going to be overlapping with Anomalous America and these things that we're talking about, Nevada, California being 2 big ones. And yeah, so I've skipped Nevada in this series because obviously I wanted to finish off the Four Corners. So I think I'm gonna hop back to Nevada, and so I don't think I'm gonna do a vote. I just don't want to leave Nevada behind. And then I think I'm probably gonna go towards the Gulf. I have some big summer plans. Um, you know, I might be planning an episode around taking a trip into the Gulf for one of these episodes. So I think I'm going to head towards the Gulf. It's a place that is very near and dear to me. I spent many summers on the Gulf, and yeah, lots of emotion connected to that region. And yeah, so I think we're just going to keep heading east and jump into the Gulf. And when I feel good about finishing off the Gulf, I'll probably head back over towards Montana and Idaho and, get towards the Badlands and the Dakotas, which are also some of my favorite places in the world. And lots of really amazing material there. So I haven't quite decided yet, but everyone was enjoying the votes, and I really enjoyed doing the votes. But I think just the direction that I want to go, at least how my brain is leading me towards the Gulf. And yeah, so yeah, let's get into sharing. We're gonna recap my preview video, why that's so important. Go over some headlines from that article. Yeah, make this as big as we can. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so the first inhabitants of America, giants in physique, fought wild beasts in deadly combat 25,000 or 50,000 years ago. Warrior Emperor Greenus' tomb reveals that the first red-headed people in all of history dwelt in America, and that strange basket makers of prehistoric Utah were a kindred people to his tribe. Now, again, you know, not to beat the dead horse, but if you haven't seen my other episodes, please go back and watch them because all of these episodes are linked essentially. You're going to find a underlying narrative. And if you remember the Utah video, they found countless red-headed mummies. And if you remember my Colorado video, they found countless red-headed mummies, and the Smithsonian was stealing all of them, and the governor and the marshals, US marshals, were pleading for the government to do something because there were no laws against it. And they were ransacking the place. They were literally tearing down temples, tearing down ruins, stealing mummies, sending them to Europe. Now, if you've watched some of my material with Cootie Mayo over the years, mods, if you could link one of his channels for me. I've reposted the 7-part series that we did together with a lot of my articles. You'll know, and he agrees with my conclusions, that much of the quote Egyptian narrative of the Nile Valley, Thebes, so on, Giza, um, is likely a fraud, and I would say predominantly supplied by Peruvian and North American mummies, and that the red-headed mummies, the narrative of the red-headed mummies, was buried and hidden away. What's also really important, since we've been discussing phenotypes and race and all these different things, remember, we have woolly haired mummies, we have straight haired mummies, we have red-headed mummies. Now, mummified people was a sign of like kingship and priesthood. Many of these people burned, and the ashes were put in were saved in urns. That's the predominant way um, of burial here in America and all over the world, believe it or not. So when you find a mummy, you're dealing with a leader or a priest or a king or, a khan or whatever description you want to assign to it. And their opinions of carrying relics and things that were important to them and their family members often being buried with them. Um, yeah, it's a so when you find things like this, it's very purposeful, and the amount of effort that went into a burial like this is considerable. And yeah, so back to the article. Weird relics show powerful humans erected pyramids. Mummies of prehistoric Aztecs found in ruins in New Mexico indicate giant men built monuments far more ancient and greater than Egypt ever produced. New light cast on remarkable race. After this, I think we definitely have to go to New Mexico, or sorry, Nevada. We're going to make a lot of correlations between red-headed giants that weren't just mummified, but were still alive, and that the Indian tribes were at war with, and were living in caves, living underground. We're going to talk about one of the largest pyramids in America, Pyramid Lake, still exists, and some cataclysm happened between the 1840s and now, because the first drawings of the pyramid show it perfectly as a pyramid with stones, and you can see all the layers and everything. And now it's just a melted conglomeration that looks like a mountain. And so I think that's going to be an important correlation to make here. It's going to kind of connect. It's going to be kind of like the glue of a lot of these articles here. Here's an image. These people, so this is a basket, weaved basket. Now we're going to talk about coiled pottery. Really important correlation here. In fact, I think I might just hop over to coiled pottery because that's a really fun one here. Yeah, coiled pottery will lead us into the Alaskan article. So let's do that real quick. So here's another basket. So we're talking about the basket makers of Utah and how they're related to this Emperor Greenus's. Remember the mummies of the basket makers were redheads for the most part. There were a few woolly headed mummies of kings and leaders, but they were predominantly redheaded people. This is a basket of a labyrinth Indian design. These were found in New Mexico, Arizona, um, and really important because the Greeks built baskets and drew designs like this. And again, if you don't follow me on Twitter, you should. I've made correlations between the labyrinth as a symbol and with the Mediterranean, and how they're using the exact same iconography and art on pottery and in pictographs and hieroglyphics here in New Mexico and Arizona as they were in the Mediterranean. And I've kind of hypothesized what Greek meant. And so let's take this. Bear with me here. We're going to go do a quick search. And since you're following me along, this will help you guys at home because I get this question a lot. So here's my page. You don't have a Twitter account, no big deal. This is what my page looks like when you find me or follow any of my links. You go, what do I want? I want to search something. His name's the Archivist, and I can't figure out how to search anything. You click the magnifying glass right here, okay? And you're going to come up here, and you got to put my name in first, okay? And then you can search anything. So you just my name, space, and whatever you want to search. Alaska, if that's what you want to search. Of course, it caps. And you're going to get all my stuff. And remember, I make a thread every episode, like this one right here. And you can click on it, and it's going to have all the episodes I talk about, or all the articles. And you can do this for every single show. So if you're behind or you're just getting tuned in here, I want to go see what he said about Alaska. And then you find my thread, and there you go. But we're looking to talk about coiled basketry. So like I was showing you there, we were talking about the labyrinth symbol, baskets, coiled baskets, the basket makers of Utah being a kindred race to this Emperor Greenus. Okay, so we're going to read this article. Prehistoric coil pottery. And thank you, everybody. Odin, Lady, Hippie, Aurorian, Brian, Danico, Thank you guys so much for being here. Prehistoric prehistoric coil pottery, an art disseminated over a vast territory at an early age. In the dim past, when primeval men occupied this continent, no one knows for how long a period, they raised mounds, they dwelt in caves, or built towns that are now below the surface of the earth. Okay, very subtle. Like, this author's just saying something like that, but this is an incredibly important point to make. Built towns that are now below the surface of the earth. Yeah, they're buried. Something happened, or several things happened. And now, coming from Alaska all the way to episode 8, folks, we're dealing with whole cities, huge, huge, unbelievable metropolises that have been buried under 1, 2, 3, 400 feet of mud, lava, many things. In all of this long era that they used flint or stone implements for all edged tools, hammers, axes, spears, etc. And remember, not only that, because one of these silly narratives is that we're dealing with the Stone Aged people, right? Well, we've found metal implements in every state from Alaska to New Mexico, metal implements. Okay. We go down deeper, we find more advanced technology. They're finding tempered copper in from we found it in California. We're finding it in Arizona. Tempered copper that they don't even know how to do today. Kiki Cookerson, I'm glad you've. I know my live streams again. They're rare and they're early in the morning. I'm a father of 3 young boys and incredibly busy full-time job, and this is the only time I can do a live stream and not have you know my wife and my children. They need something every 5 minutes. So I appreciate everybody who's here at this hour. It means a lot to me. I work very hard throughout the week, and I get up early um, on these days to make sure I can make this happen. Um, this project and getting this channel going means a lot to me, and I couldn't do it without you guys. So, and I realize that this hour is, kind of inconvenient, and it's not. I'm not always, it's not. It's not going to be about getting the most viewers because it's 5 a.m. But just getting these videos done is what is important to me. So yeah, again, thank you from the bottom of my heart for everybody who's been following me along. And if you're new to this, no problem. If you really enjoy it, I'm so happy. Um, there's tons of material to go back and watch. Um, and I clip all of these videos into smaller videos. Some people don't like that, and other people do. Um, honestly, as a busy parent, I know that not everyone can invest 2 hours, 90 minutes in a video. So clipping these into smaller portions has been incredibly beneficial. And yeah, so I'm going to keep doing that. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to clip some of my first few episodes, California and Alaska I mean, there's gems in every video. So expect to see some bleeding from the last episodes. I'm going to clip this one into smaller portions, and I am going to go back and do some of my previous episodes too. I prefer the longer. Well, I'm grateful. That's awesome. I do this for the longer videos and the people that enjoy the longer videos. But ultimately, I want to produce content for everybody. And there's the shorter video people because again, that's the beautiful thing about YouTube is I can see every one of my subscribers and what they're watching, and you wouldn't believe the shorter videos. You know, like my long videos are 80% subscribers. 80% of the views of my long videos are people that have been here that enjoy it, and that's fantastic. I love that. That's my bread and butter, right? That's what I'm happiest doing. But then it's like a flip. 80% of the viewers of my short videos are new to the channel. So, yeah, I'm just trying to embrace all. And yeah, but yeah, please, if you have a comment or an opinion or anything, That's what the comments are for. And that's why I love the comments. And overall, since I started the channel, it's been overwhelmingly positive, which is fantastic. I dealt with a lot more negativity on Twitter over the years with people and newspapers and the things I was sharing. And but YouTube, I thought it would be more negative on YouTube, to be honest. But it's been predominantly positive. My average um, thumbs up is like 99%, which is incredible. I didn't think it was going to be like that. So it just shows you don't make assumptions. And yeah, and I'm rambling here, and time is precious. So let's get back into this. We're talking about basket makers of New Mexico. We're talking about the warrior emperor Greenus, the Atlantean king of the Aztecs, found in New Mexico, 1922. Um, and we're making the correlation here since I got off subject, and people maybe that just hopped in. Prehistoric coiled pottery, an art disseminated over a vast territory at an early age, right? Okay, and we were touching on stone implements. Well, they're finding more than just stone implements. Okay, it's everything. At the same time, having metal pots or kettles, right? So they're trying to pass the Stone Age narrative off on us, but they keep finding relics as they go deeper that destroy the narrative. That's what we're doing here with this series. We're kind of flipping the narrative on its head. The deeper you go, we're not dealing with cavemen. We're dealing with much more advanced races who were destroyed by war or the ravages of cataclysm or both. So yeah, where was I? They were cooking with pots or kettles. A rough earthenware was used for cooking, and all other uses for which we now use iron. Exactly. Cast iron is ancient. They're finding cast iron everywhere, all over America. And iron was used in many buildings. And as we get closer to the Mississippi Valley, we're going to find lots of iron. There is somewhat of a resemblance in many of the stone implements all over the world. Absolutely. We're dealing with very similar people. And we're going to hop into a video from my Alaska episode that correlates New Mexico, Alaska, and we're dealing with a civilization that covered the globe. And like I talked about a little bit in the Arizona video, what's the most ancient symbol? It's not the most ancient, but one of the most ancient, the swastika. Um, as we get into my radium series, we're going to discuss the swastika. For me, it's an alchemical symbol. It was worn on the robes of the Phoenician priests. It was found all over. It was the most sacred symbol in Arizona, the most sacred symbol in Utah. It was found in California, New Mexico. It's found in Oregon. It's been found in Alaska. And it keeps going all the way to the East Coast. It's been found in the Mediterranean. It's been found in India. It's a worldwide symbol. And the same people making this coiled pottery, it's the same people using the labyrinth symbol. It's used by the Greeks. And yeah, we're dealing with a similar culture with the same technology. It is only recently it has been discovered that there is a resemblance in much of the pottery of this early age, especially in coiled pottery. This pottery was made by rolling in long strings like cord, and while sopped, beginning with one end to coil it round and round, increasing the size of the bottom till it assumed the desired dimensions, then shaping it up the sides till the required form and size was attained. The most extraordinary part of this investigation is that this ware, made in the same manner, okay, this is incredibly important. The most extraordinary part of this investigation is that this ware, made in the same manner, is found in the mounds of Florida. And if you remember my Oregon video and my Alaska video, we talked about shell mounds identical to Florida are found in Oregon and Alaska. They found a temple, a hut temple in Arizona. If you remember my Arizona video, completely made out of shells, ocean shells. A temple, again, I'm repeating this, a temple made out of shells, completely made out of shells, 100% made out of shells in Arizona. Okay. Now we're making correlations between their pottery. And this will be important as we make this Alaska narrative, and then we'll hop back into the Greenus video or into the Greenus article. Mounds of Florida and Ohio, in the cliff dwellings of New Mexico and Arizona, in the buried cities of the canyons of these territories, Utah, Colorado, also in Connecticut Valley and under the ancient shell heaps of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Where shell mounds are found all over the world. They're making the same pottery, they're using the same symbols. What happened? According to the uses of these pots were intended for, so were they made large or small, thick or thin, of various shapes, it was a common practice to use some sharp instrument to dent or work up some fanciful designs. Now, again, we're going to go into an Alaska article here, but the design stuff, the patterns, the shapes, the painting, the labyrinth symbol, the Greek friezes, all these things correlating to people all over the globe without obliterating the lines of the coil. In some cases, they are beautifully marked, looking like carved black oak. Others are made of light-colored clay in very fine coils, prettily indented, forming neat designs. Some of the best wares handsomely smoothed. Jen, thank you so much. Ian, morning. Thanks for being here. All were smoothed inside before they were dry. Probably some of those intended to withstand heat have plumbago mixed into the inner surface of the vessels. Yeah, some of these had a kind of plaster inside, and I think those were probably used for very high heat. Correspondence science from which journal the cut here presented was reproduced. There are many fanciful designs of this ware, some very large jars, pots of all shapes, bowls, cups, pitchers, etc. So again, the most extraordinary part of this investigation is that this ware, made in the same manner, is found in the mountains of Florida and Ohio, Mississippi Valley, Florida, the Gulf, and the cliff dwellings of New Mexico, and in Arizona, in the burned cities of the canyons, Colorado and Arizona again, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. And again, you're finding swastikas in Massachusetts, you're finding them in Alaska, you're finding them all over the Gulf, you're finding them in Arizona. Yeah. China, everywhere. So then we're going to hop over to an article from my Alaska episode, Alaska's Ancient City. Okay. An earthquake removed the side of a mountain. I know there's a lot of new listeners who haven't seen this one. A prospector wandering through Alaska, not wandering, but very familiar with the territory, looking for, new places, found a mountain that had washed away, revealing an ancient stone city in the mountain. This sounds just like what we've been showing in Arizona and Colorado, California, that quote mounds. And if you remember my Colorado episode, they had a 4-mile circumference mound, a mound that was 4 miles in circumference, that was a giant stone city buried in debris and sand. Robert Seffer. Yeah, Robert Seffer banned me a long time ago. We disagreed on some things, and he didn't appreciate what I had to say. So he banned me. We don't talk. I tried. So there you go. I've had to say this and explain this before, but yeah. Robert Seffer does a lot of great stuff, but he's kind of an asshole. So that's my own personal experience with him. And it's unfortunate because I too came from a place of appreciation for Robert, but he's not the nicest person, which is unfortunate. So why I brought this up, okay? They found, now remember, a big focus of my Alaska video was to show that Alaska at one point in time was completely tropical. The whole place. They find tropical coral, tropical fish, tropical plants, huge plants In Alaska, they found a tropical forest, no joke, in the middle of the tundra, essentially. These men are stomping through snow and they come upon a tropical paradise. The ground was being heated by volcanic action, and the snow um, couldn't sustain there. It had created its own ecosystem, tropical foliage, tropical trees. They said all kinds of animals and birds, like from the equatorial regions, existed there. And that wasn't the only one they found. I think I'm going to have to go through Alaska episode and clip that one up today just because there's so many correlations here. But let's just go back to this real quick. On arriving at the situation, I saw a great body of earth had broken away and rolled down the mountain. The first thing to attract me was the discovery of a small piece of broken earthenware, light brown in color, with an artistically worked trimming of Greek design worked in black pigment. It was just such a piece as those I had found in New Mexico some years before. And anyone can imagine my amazement at its discovery in this quarter. This man is in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, in the winter, finds a mountain that had been washed away during an earthquake, revealing a stone city with Greek pottery identical to the pottery he found in New Mexico. I turned quickly to scan the sides of the earth where the avalanche had torn it apart, and in the midst of the crevice, not 300 yards from where I stood, I saw the protrusion of a wall of dull gray masonry, crumbling and broke, but showing beyond all doubt, even at the distance, that the builder was a human. This wall was a little over 6 feet deep in the ground. I discovered on arriving at its location, both ends of it were lost in the ground. On making further investigation, I found evidence of numerous other walls at a distance of 30 or more feet apart, and some of them revealed corners of masonry. It soon became evident to me that I had discovered an American Pompeii. Through the work of the avalanche, the remains of houses I saw were undoubtedly those of a prehistoric city covered with earth and debris, which had hidden it through some volcanic action, possibly during, but most likely long after its destruction, centuries on centuries ago. Important correlation to make there, right? Because what have we been saying from every state now? 8 episodes in, and there's a Pompeii in every state. Remember, Tacoma, they were digging a well in Tacoma. They went down 1,000 feet and found a beach. 1,000 feet below the surface, they found another beach. A previous level of ocean, 1,000 feet. Tropical foliage. At this 1,000-foot mark, they found all kinds of tropical plants. They found shells. They found, the same thing we're finding here in Alaska. But what happened? Remember in the Washington video, they were digging out 50 million cubic tons of earth to build Seattle. And if you remember in that episode, you look at the images I posted, it doesn't make any sense. 50 million cubic tons. Some say up to 80 million cubic tons. Now, if you understand that number, that's insane. And if you look at the images, ground level was 100 feet or more below the mud in some places. Yeah, so an American Pompeii in every single state on the West Coast. Now all the way into Mexico, we're going to find the same thing. And why I wanted to touch on this first is because we're talking about the basket makers, the coiled pottery, and the correlations thereof, and why that's important. So again, for those who have joined late, we're doing a quick little synopsis of my New Mexico preview video, Warrior Emperor Greenus, the Atlantean king of the Aztecs, found in New Mexico, the red-headed king. And we're just going through some of the article, showing my highlighted parts and breezing our way kind of through it here. Each succeeding race, we're now back into the Emperor Greenus video, our article here. We're dealing with the red-headed giant. Remember, he was only 6'4", which is funny because that's how tall I am. 6'4", but the people of his tribe were 4'4". So he was a giant to these people. 2 feet taller. Pretty nuts. The cover of the pothole tomb of Greenus shown above is of coiled basketry, like Merry Widow hat. Merry Widow hat, again, that's a direct correlation to that labyrinth coiled pottery I showed you from the Mediterranean. So the baskets are the same. The imagery is the same. The hieroglyphics are the same. The art is the same. The pottery is the same worldwide. This tropical vapor canopy-esque time frame, we're dealing with like a worldwide race where skin color and all these things meant nothing. And often these people were not at war with other humans, but were at war with giant animals, giant reptiles, giant bugs, giant cats. At the left is a mummy of a sacred turkey. So the sacred turkey, this bird was sacred all the way into the Yucatan and in other parts of the world, right? Now, think of Thanksgiving. Why, the people that, supplied the turkeys and why the turkey was sacred, it had a very similar story to the rising of the phoenix. This correlates with Arizona again. Arizona, the phoenix. And Phoenix was called Phoenix because it was built on the buried city. Even the man who named Phoenix said this, that we're raising a city from the ashes of the previous civilization. They knew this, okay? And remember, they were reusing and repurposing 1,000 miles of ancient canals that they said were far more ancient and more advanced than any canals in the world here in Arizona. But we're in New Mexico, but again, we're dealing with the same people, okay? The first inhabitants of America, of which we have knowledge because of the extraordinary perfect mummies they left behind, are variously known the basket makers, the spear throwers. They lived underground in the Southwest, with their dead mummified in sealed potholes of chambers well below the surface. Well, surface level was much, much lower, as we've been showing. In some places, 400 feet lower. Their successors built cliff houses over them and either perished or moved along. Now remember, these cliff houses, you guys, they were just stone doorways, okay? That's all they were. They had hundreds of miles of tunnels in the mountains. So these entrances were entrances. They were labyrinths for defense, and they led into the mountain. That's where all these people lived. Now, in the Arizona video, we talked about they found 400 people, 400 mummies in one of these interior caves, as they called it. And they literally found so many tunnels, they couldn't even map them all. They said it went on for so long, they just gave up. 14 miles of tunnels, and they were like, okay, we how long can we wander in these tunnels, you know? And the Native Americans tell the same story. When the cavalry, the quote American cavalry, was fighting some of these warlike tribes of the Southwest, they said they would disappear into caves and they'd end up in Mexico. They had the hardest time fighting these people because these caves go for hundreds, if not thousands of miles underground. Montezuma described this, that they could, that they could escape from the Yucatan and they could end up in America. Well, what he was describing as Texas, but basically they said there are caves that go from the Yucatan all the way into Texas. And I think these caves are everywhere, all across the world. So their successors built cliff houses, and like we've shown, the cliff houses are just doors. That some of them had 20, 30 rooms, but I think these were just storage rooms. Often they found jars full of food and corn and so forth. And the people were really living underground. Then on the top of these cliff houses came succeeding races, like we've been saying, succeeding races on succeeding races on succeeding races, 3 up to 4 civilizations, who erected more modern pueblos. They're not modern. Remember, the deeper we go, the more advanced it becomes. We're dealing with incredible cataclysms. We're going to get into some articles about lava flow. Lava flow in New Mexico is several hundred feet thick, thousands and thousands of acres in size. And they're finding hundreds of homes buried in it. The strange feature is that each succeeding race built a village or a city on the ruins of its predecessor. That's not strange. This is worldwide, you guys. It's kind of what we've been covering here. It's not strange. That's the norm. The strange feature is that each succeeding race built a village or a city on the ruins of the predecessor. Now, again, I'm only going to cover what I've highlighted in these articles, and I apologize that they're hard to see in this live stream here, but they're in the preview video. And the link for you to read it at your leisure is in the preview video where I cover the entire article. I read every word. But we're not going to do that because that took like 50 minutes or something like that. How did these strange people reach Grand Gulch, and whence did they come? He reasoned that it would only find basket maker remains and culture beneath other pueblos, and the discoveries have proved this correct. Now, this is the thing. People hear the term basket makers. It's like caveman. It's like Stone Age. You just think we're dealing with a crude bunch of dummies. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. In Aztec, New Mexico, he selected a great deserted city or pueblo of the usual skyscraper type of Zuni, New Mexico. Now, remember, Zuni, Arizona comes from this same term. And we're going to get into the druidical relationship. In fact, I'll hop into there next. Oh, Longo, love you, man. Thanks for being here. Good timing. So, like I was saying, oh yeah, Longo, we covered some cool. We talked about the history of coiled basketry and the correlations between Florida and the mounds of the Mississippi and the buried remains of these Atlantean kings of New Mexico. You missed that part. So there's something which we've talked about. So you're really not missing much. But where was I? Here he began excavations and entered cellar tombs so ancient they make ancient Egypt look modern indeed. The chambers he opened were sealed not less than 25,000 years ago. Again, I don't prescribe to a lot of these dating methods, and these timelines could be completely ridiculous. But again, we're dealing. He's down 3 civilizations. Is the point? This excavation took months and months, and as he said earlier, we're dealing with each succeeding race built a village or a city on the ruins of its predecessor. And this gentleman is 3 civilizations deep. So he's now down to the bottom. And the mummies within are well preserved as when placed therein. 2 chambers are the most interesting of the numerous recent discoveries in the Aztec ruin. Enormous prehistoric Pueblo community dwelling near Aztec, New Mexico. Beneath the debris adjacent to the famous painted room. I just read that one. Sorry. Cedar beams. Okay, this is just like we've been saying from California to here. And when I was making the Deuteronomy references from the Bible and the land of the cedars, right? That's here. The ancient cedars of Colorado. They found petrified tree stumps that were miles in circumference. Tree stumps, miles in circumference. Okay, you have cities built on these tree stumps, and as we get farther into this article, we're going to talk about they found petrified logs that were 60% copper. 60% copper. Okay, they're finding radium in these petrified trees. When a tree petrifies, you can find almost every mineral of the mineral kingdom in these trees. Okay. Down the line, I hope to do a video breakdown of Avatar, because I do believe that's a very close representation of what we're dealing with here. And when we talk about blue skinned giants, we're talking about red-headed giants. And the Druids, right? The tree language, the people speaking to the trees, right? What do the people in Avatar do? They connect, they ground themselves to the tree, right? And an often potent symbol of the these Druid priests is the staff. Now, the staff is grounding you. It's also a piece of the tree. It's kind of like the wand, right? The holly wood. It's a very similar idea. Back to the article. The ceilings as round as when the trees were felled. The wall stones, the marks of quartzite pebbles. Okay, they find all kinds of exotic minerals in these homes. Again, we're talking about the farther down we go, the more advanced things become. Bright and fresh, shaped the blocks. So again, we're dealing with hewn stone. Okay, it goes from mud pueblos to hewn stone, just like in California, Oregon, just like the article we talked about with the Greek design in Alaska. So we got Greeks in Alaska and we got Greeks in New Mexico. What is a Greek? This room was the tomb of a gigantic warrior emperor who lay in solitary state. An altar in the painted room. He towered shoulders above the average man of his tribe. Correct. Like I said, they found the people who were mummifying him, right? Kind of the caretakers of his tomb, and they were like mid 4 feet. So 6'4". He's 2 feet taller than the other people in this tribe. He had been wrapped in a mantle of feather cloth and enshrouded with a mat of woven rush stems. Upon the skull rested a large spherical vase with neatly fitting cover, both exquisitely wrought and ornamented. Stellium, thanks for being here. I'm excited. Hopefully, I look forward to doing more work with Stellium. We're going to talk about more of this petrified past of ours. Hopefully, more from a mineralogical standpoint. But, I'm not going to have time to cover all of that, but we'll get into the petrified tree article before we finish here. Within easy grasp of the right hand were 2 wooden handles of 2 stone battle axes, and by them a crafted knife of quartzite. Okay, quartzite knife. Remember, inside this man's tomb, the walls were encrusted with quartzite. They rubbed quartzite all over the. Can you imagine what this looked like? When when light first hit this tomb, it just shone. Light bouncing around this like a mirror. A circular shield, 3 feet in diameter, unlike anything previously found in Pueblo ruins, covered the warrior from thigh to temple. It is an example of coiled basketry, exactly like we've been talking about with the coiled pottery. Same technology, a big link between all these different races, right? Hieroglyphics were very similar. Language was very similar. Iconography was similar. The swastika, again, we talked about. Sacred symbol to these people on a lot of the pottery, on a lot of the dress of the people. The outer surface of the shield had been coated with gum and thickly spangled with flakes of mica. When held in the sunlight, due to the numberless reflecting surfaces, the great disk would have shone with dazzling brilliance, perhaps sufficiently intense to have confused the vision of the archers who sought to drive an arrow through the shield of the flesh behind it. Of 13 mummies found in an adjoining chamber, one was the most extraordinary which had come to light. Now, this is the one about the witch. The witch was impaled. A staff had been stabbed through the woman, and she'd been impaled into the ground. We're not going to cover that too much because we're just trying to talk about the warrior here. This gigantic warrior emperor of the basket makers, we will name Greenus. Remember this name. We're going to dive into the Greenus name. It's going to take us back to Ireland and why that's important, because from here we're going to hop into the Druidical order of things, standing stones. So the Irie, the red-headed Druidical order of the Irie, was here in New Mexico. Again, the swastika. Follow the swastika. We got the Phoenicians. You got the same priestly orders wearing the same symbols, you guys. Dr. Wessler informs me that we have the actual founders of the Aztec and Bonita cultures. unless later excavations prove differently, Greenus must stand as the first emperor of the founders of the Aztecs. Now remember, the Aztecs themselves said they came from this region. Okay, it's the same narrative with what the Mormons were saying about Salt Lake, and that the Aborigines of that area called it the land of milk and honey. Their forefathers said that this was their original homeland. Okay, and the Aztecs came from this area and were driven out by a band of evil hordes. And who are those evil hordes? Well, we're going to get into that here before the show's over. Greenus must stand as the first founder of the Empire of the Aztecs, as we said, whose later and wonderful structures adorned central Mexico in a line extending toward the Yucatan, and which extended westward on the lost continent of Atlantis, the famed Atlantis of Plato. Atlantis is America. This is exactly what this man's saying. He's saying, and this guy has been digging in this region for 3 years. Right, studying the petroglyphs, studying the hieroglyphs, studying the language, studying the basketry, studying the symbols. Okay, this is the 1920s, and in his opinion, this man is the beginning, the starting of the transition of the culture to the Yucatan, and calling this the lost continent of Atlantis. Again, we talked about the basketry that links us to Florida. We talked about the symbology. The Greeks, okay, the same symbols in Alaska, in Alabama, right? You got the Arabic words here that are found all over the Gulf as well. The basket makers, of which Emperor Greenus was a symbol, were a Tesian or red-headed race. At least all their mummies so far brought to the American Museum have reddish wavy hair. If they were the founders of the Aztecs must be, as assumed, to begin the first Tesian-haired people on Earth of which we have knowledge. Now, you'll find articles that say that that every phenotype, I hate using the word race, but every phenotype existed in the Yucatan. When Cortez describes coming here, he says that there were Greeks, there were Etruscans, there were Ethiopians. Okay, this is his own words. Okay. So, yeah, I think that's an important of note there. Their hair color and the cross section so positively that the first Americans never migrated from here. Asia, a land of straight black-haired people. Right. So he's saying that these people didn't come here from somewhere else, that this is where they started. And you get the same narrative in Mexico, like I said, okay? You have everything. You have Ethiopians. You have, quote, Asians, okay? Chinese, which is, an amalgamation. But, even Columbus himself, when he landed in Cuba, oh, this is Asia. Here we are. We're in Asia. And the first people he saw were what would later be described as Ethiopians. So the first people he saw in Cuba were Ethiopians, but he said he was in Asia. Okay. And one of the oldest languages in Mexico was Hebraic, Aramaic. And these are his own translations, you guys. He had an Irish captain. He had Hebrew translators and Arabic. And when he landed in Cuba, he said, I'm here. I'm in Asia. And they were going to Asia. And what they later would find, or later would come out in his own diaries, I found Atlantis, because that's where they were going. They knew we're going to Atlantis. I landed in Asia, okay, or Greater India, India Superior. What's an Indian? Anyways, I'm getting off subject. We have ample evidence that the ancient civilizations of Mexico, Yucatan, and stored Atlantis date back at least 250,000 years, and forming the true Garden of Eden. Yeah, absolutely. This whole area is Atlantis. It wasn't, just one space. The giant island in the Atlantic is America. Fossil skeletons of Florida, Rancho Brea, and the caves of California prove the contention of exceeding age of mankind along the American equatorial belt. Now, since Longo's in chat, this is incredibly important, you guys, okay? If you haven't seen my talks with Longo and some of his work, this is incredibly important. This is an author from 1920 saying that this is the Garden of Eden, that the ancient civilizations of Mexico, the Yucatan, and Story Atlantis come from this region, the fossil skeletons of Florida, okay? This is the bog people of Longo's work, which connects with all of these redheaded mummies that I've been showing you throughout my entire Anomalous America episode series. Rancho Brea, which is the La Brea tar pits, which I covered in my California video. So if you haven't seen that, please go back and watch, where they found pygmies, they found dwarfs, they found giants, they found mammoths, they found saber-toothed tigers, they found giant lizards that flow, pterodactyls, quote pterodactyls. Prove without contention the exceeding age of mankind along American equatorial belt. So why is this important? The American equatorial belt. So remember, the whole world was tropical. We had some cataclysm, some event that kickstarted the apologize. My oldest son is awake, which is early for him. And I lost my train of thought. Kickstarted the frozen period, right? The ice age. And so what he's saying here is that along the American equatorial belt, everyone migrated, right? You can imagine we had Greek stone cities in Alaska. Something happened, and then everyone had to migrate south, pushing all of these people into a small area. And that they evolved here, right? So as we keep saying, we're digging down 3-4 levels of civilization, mostly along the equatorial belt. The farther north you go, Alaska is a good example. We're not building on mountains in the middle of Alaska because it's covered in snow all year long, at least 80% of the year or more. But here on the equatorial belt or in the warmer regions, as populations expand, we keep building on top of these old places. Jay Dreamers, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So this is really important to remember. It correlates a lot of stuff that I've been saying and that Dr. Longo has been saying. And the evidences here as they dig deeper down are incredibly kind of showing these same narratives. And this guy is just touching on so many things. It's why this article is one of my favorites of all time. So again, I'm doing a quick synopsis because this article is gigantic. If you want to see the whole thing, see my preview video, Warrior Emperor to Greenus, Atlantean King found in New Mexico. So warrior took place. The survivors were mummified, the bodies placed in potholes. The potholes were lined with baked clay, and the mummies were placed in them singly, doubled up in squatting position, chins to knees. Okay, so this is found all over China, Japan. People were mummified this way, chin to knees. Okay, red-headed mummies have been found in China in earthenware, chin to knees, just like this. Okay, follow the swastika, follow the pottery, follow the symbology, follow the hieroglyphics, same thing. And since Jay Dreamers is in the channel, obviously we got to talk about, I covered it more in the Colorado video because there's the most evidence for it. But as we get into some of these petrifactions later on in this video, we're gonna make more correlations between an electrical event of some kind, because the petrifactions, especially in America Southwest, we're talking about desert regions, and one of the larger byproducts of petrifaction is sand. When you have large quantities of petrifaction, you have incredibly large amounts of sand, and a big majority of that would be from organic matter, trees being one of them. We're talking about silica, mica, all of these things, that are on a small scale. We're talking about grains of sand. You magnify those into very large crystals and silicas and stuff like that, and you get some of these rarefied earth metals involved. And the narrative of mineralogy becomes incredibly important. So chin to knees, rabbit skin robes, beautiful feathers. The types of arms and ornaments, queer-looking toys, coiled matting placed on top, modern women's like a large summer hat. Okay, so this is an important part. This is kind of what I was talking about too when we talked about the tropical age, the fauna age. We're dealing with incredibly large insects, large reptiles, giant petrified turtles, like I talked about in the Colorado video. In the Alaska video, they found petrified turtles, giant petrified turtles. They found them in Oregon, Eastern Oregon. They found petrified turtles, huge, 10 feet or more. Okay, so now we're talking about his enemies. Emperor Greenus. Remember, he had a painted tomb, the tomb that he was buried in. They had all these paintings on the walls. Okay, some of the paintings were his enemies, the wild beasts of the times, had plenty of fresh meat or herds of American horses. Now we've talked about the American horse. We have skeletal remains of horses 50 feet tall. 50 feet tall horses, you guys, in California, 400 feet below the surface. So you can only imagine, the deeper you go, everything gets bigger. Start getting into the fauna age. American horses, the latter mastodons, of which bears, lions, wolves, jaguars, and saber-toothed cats. There is also evidences that the primitive basket makers themselves feasted on horses. Bones and marrow have been found. The skyscraping pueblos of these grounds cover 300 square feet and has 100 rooms. Okay, this is just the pueblo on top, but the important stuff is what lies below. Remember, he's saying 3 civilizations down. He dates some of those 10,000 years or more. The painted chamber, the rooms which cleaned of debris were found in perfect condition. The most stunning scene of the great Aztec pueblo on earth is the painted chamber. The room is in perfect condition. The interior plastered and painted in brilliant white with dull red sides, borders and runnings of triangular designs, and approaching this in beauty and perfection, the most beautiful found in America. Here was the holiest sanctum or shrines of the prehistoric people. Herein is the sacred altar, with a sacred serpent carved in wood over the ceiling of the finest workmanship. Nothing like it has ever been found. They built the first pyramids. It is beneath the ruins of this magnificent pueblo that the present excavations are being made by blasting holes through solid floors and excavating the chambers of the long prior race of basket makers. Herein, so again, like we said, even these Indian tribes, these quote wandering Indian tribes, moved into abandoned homes that had been destroyed. Okay, this is important to note on. And this man's 3 civilizations down. That's where he's getting these, 10,000 years for the first set of homes, which again, I don't necessarily agree with the dates, but it's up to you to decide. We're dealing with very, very long time frames though. But we want to take this back to the time when we're dealing with a worldwide tropical climate, right? And as he stated in this, everyone was moved into an equatorial range. So an ice age occurred, some kind of event, maybe several events, and everyone was forced into this narrow band of space to survive, right? And this is again a correlation between the Gulf Stream, Gotland, access to Helsinki, the Phoenicians, right? Montezuma himself said he was taught the arts by sailors who came from the East. Now, a lot of these narratives too say the East was Florida, and the Phoenicians had their culture based in Florida. I would say that was they had a port in Florida, Tampa probably being their main port, because they had several. The Phoenicians had ports in Switzerland. The lake dwellers of Switzerland are, from an iconographical standpoint, almost identical with the lake dwellers of Tampa. They build the same style homes, they wear the same style clothes, blah, blah, blah. And how could you do that in Switzerland in the middle of winter? Obviously, that's impossible. So again, we're dealing with I would say we need to shrink the time frames and get that ice age much closer to our time frame for it to make sense. But yeah. And so, the Atlantean connection, the Phoenician connection, the Greek connection, right? The pottery, all the stuff we've been talking about. Really important. Okay, back to this. I want to try to get through this as fast as I can. If you want more information, and I know you can't see this article in the thing, so it's kind of stupid, and everyone's got this little thing they can't see to look at. But, anyways, the sacred serpent carved in the wood on the ceiling, the finest workmanship. Nothing like it has ever been seen before. Okay, they're blasting holes in the ground. They're saying that these were the first builders of the pyramids. And so, yeah, go back to my preview video. You can read it at your own leisure too. The link is in the preview video. Now we're going to jump into obedient to. Yeah, he gave me this fantastic link here. I started breaking down the names, and the man who uncovered that chamber 100% named the emperor after this man, Tigernumps, right? Son of Folok, son of Ithriel, a descendant of Urimon, was, according to medieval Irish legend and historical traditions, the early High King of Ireland. Okay, Gaelic Ireland. And why this is important, because when you look farther into these time frames and these names, again, I've been correlating that some of the biblical histories of Ireland, Palestine, the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, was happening here in America, right? And Irie, that Arizona was the original land of the Irie or the Irish. The first home, as we were just saying here, with Emperor Greenus, and that the first Tesian race found its home here in the equatorial belt of America, right? So the name Tigrinus takes us to this gentleman. Historical traditions lead us to that he was the High King of Ireland. Now, the correlation here is also important because when you look at the time frames, it synchronizes his reign with the deaths of Thineus, Declius, kings of Assyria, the reigns of David and Solomon in Israel. Now, this is important because now we're correlating more of the Utah video, right? All of the mining regions of Utah were called the mines of Ophir. The mining regions of Colorado, the oldest mining regions of Colorado, at least from an English standpoint, 1800s, were called the mines of Ophir. I've postulated that the Mormon Temple of Salt Lake is the original King of Solomon, or Temple of Solomon. My apologies. That it was the original Mecca of the region, and that when Moses led his people across the Red Sea, it was the Vermilion Sea of California, and that Moses was buried in Moab of Utah on Mount Nebo, or at least looking over the regions from Mount Nebo. And again, this is all a stretch, but seeing more and more of the correlations again with, Arizona got its name from the Irie. We're finding more and more people in the late 1800s saying that the Tesian race, it finds its oldest historical placement here in America, here in Arizona, Arizona, here in Colorado, here in Utah. Now here we are, episode 8, New Mexico. And the timelines are overlapping with the kings of Assyria. Now Assyria is, as I've been postulating and finding lots of historical evidence for in these newspapers, Assyria was along the Mississippi Valley. Now we're finding correlations between the pottery, the language, the iconography, right? All along this same area, the equatorial belt. It extends farther, but in this time frame we're discussing, post these cataclysms, whatever they were, several of them. And so really interesting connection here. Important to remember. And here's another little segment he sent me. This Tigrinus, or Tigrinus, was the monarch who set up the fabulous idol called Calm Crunch. Now, this is important. Idols were found all over this region, lots of them. Sun worship is very much connected to this as well. Now, the next article we're going to read, we're going to talk about the Druids of New Mexico. This idol, Crom Crunch, was worshipped up to the time of St. Patrick. Now, what did we just describe? The most important symbol in the painted chamber, the burial tomb of Emperor Greenus, was the serpent. The most important sacred symbol in the painted tomb, I'm repeating this, was the carved serpent. Now, in Colorado, we find carved serpents that look like Chinese serpents, quote Chinese, right? We find the same thing in Utah and the same thing in California. The serpent was a potent symbol, like the swastika, that connects a lot of these people together, right? And this idol was worshipped until St. Patrick. And what did St. Patrick do? Well, he drove the serpents, quote, the serpents out of Ireland. Well, there are no snakes in Ireland, but there are tons of snakes in the American Southwest, all over. And the only remains of a dragon ever found in a cave in Utah. If you saw my Utah video, you'll remember the prospector finds the 100-foot-long skeleton of a dragon in a cave 50 feet below ground. And he won't give up the location of it. And then who's called? The Smithsonian's notified because this guy's looking to get paid. And the Smithsonian offered him 50 grand and you never heard about it again. Okay. This is like 1877. 50 grand in 1877. That's a lot of money. Okay. The Smithsonian was paying exorbitant amounts of money. And who were they getting their funding from? Well, stay tuned to my Smithsonian video and we'll get into that a little bit more. This monarch introduced, now also, if you haven't seen my Arizona video, and I apologize, but this is important because I make a lot of correlations here. The first monarch of Arizona, we talk about the monarch, the king, the six-toed giant king dug up in Arizona, who was wearing the mitre. Okay? The bishop's mitre. Okay? This monarch introduced certain distinctions among the Irish, being wearing certain colors, which certain person believed to have the origin of the Scotch plaid. You guys, this is huge, okay? This is the tartan. Scotch plaid is tartan. Now, who was wearing the tartan? Well, many of the ancient races from Montezuma all the way up until, some of these, quote, Aboriginal tribes at the Gulf of Mexico that Longo's done such a great job of talking about, okay? So the tartan was assigned by this man as a distinction of rank. Important, okay? The Celts, the Scots, existing here all over the American Southwest. The anchor, the oldest Tesian races find their home here in Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, so on, equatorial belt, the original area of Atlantis, or the remnants of Atlantis, sorry. But yeah, so again, you can just follow my link, which is in the video preview, and you can go dig on this on your own. I spent a lot of time on this and I have so much to cover. So we're going to get off this subject here and we're going to get on to talking about the Druids in New Mexico. Okay. Let's see. Where was that one? Was it farther down? Yes, it was. Dr. Benson's Buried Cities, New Mexico, 1904. Again, I'm horrible looking at chat, but I appreciate all of you. Paul, good to see you. Lex, thanks for being here again. Jillian, Odin, appreciate you guys. Means a lot. Now we're getting into the Druids of New Mexico. Dr. Benson's Buried Cities. A correspondent says New Mexico is covered with buried cities, of course, just like all of the world, but predominantly here in the American Southwest. A.M. Swan writes to the Albuquerque Journal-Democrat as follows. The alleged find by Professor Burson of a buried city near El Paso is, if true, no matter of surprise. Of course not. They're not even surprised. Obedient to you. Yeah, I just shared some of your work. Hopefully you saw that. Hopefully you were in here when I did that. It's no matter of surprise to anyone who's familiar with the archaeology of New Mexico. They don't even care. They're like, where? You went 100 feet down and you found 1,200 rooms. You guys, the largest building ever discovered in the world, according to some of these articles, was here in New Mexico. They found on one floor 1,200 rooms. Okay. 1,200 rooms on one floor of a building. Insane. Okay. Insane. And we talked about the two buildings in Colorado that were both 6,000 feet long. Anyways, back to the article. And if true, is no matter of surprise to anyone who's familiar with archaeology of New Mexico. Professor Longmire is correct in saying that there are numerous towns buried all over New Mexico. These towns and many isolated structures belonging to the same people can easily be distinguished from Pueblo ruins, as they are better constructed, often being of well-dressed stone, laid in ashlar work, with cement joints, the walls generally plastered with the same cement. There is a large town buried at San Mateo in Valencia County, one of the buildings of which was partly exhumed by Dr. Juan Amando Chavez, who discovered it by accident. Another partly buried at Aguja del Ojo in Valencia County, and many others known only to cattle and sheepmen in Valencia. Socorro and Sierra counties. Sheriff A.B. Laird of Sierra County partially exhumed a buried group of ancient buildings in which he found perfect ears of petrified corn. Of course, giant corn found all over the place. Some of the ancient forests, of which Professor Lungmeyer speaks of, have become petrified forests. Okay, important when we're talking about some of these cataclysms. One of these in Socorro County undoubtedly furnished shelter to an ancient druidical place of worship. This was discovered by Mayor H. Pratt of Laguna while engaged in surveying the Socorro Grant, when found the altar stone was still in place, but broken into sections, while outer circles of standing stones were evidences of its ancient use. And this is above ground, you guys. Now imagine what lies below ground, right? As we've been saying, this is a petrified forest. Okay, the whole forest petrified, trees still standing. Okay, just like we found in Arizona, they found the same thing in Utah. You'll find forests that are laid over, that have been hit by some giant tidal wave or God knows what, a pyroclastic flow of some kind. And then you'll find forests like in Oregon, acres and acres, hundreds of acres, thousands of acres of trees that have been completely crystallized. Incredible. But guess what? Unfortunately, they cut them all down. The mining companies went, oh, these trees have been turned into 60% copper, 10% silver, 4% gold. They got radium inside of them. They destroyed them all. They took them all down. The only one that was saved was the Arizona petrified forest, and that's all laying on the ground, and it's tiny. But in the 1800s, there were standing petrified forests found all over America. I think Professor Lungmeyer is correct in his hypothesis that sometime in the past, all human life in New Mexico has been destroyed by a catastrophe or a cataclysm. Those who were interested a few years ago in my articles upon this subject published the Southwest magazine will remember that I gave my reasons for this belief. I think Professor L will find some difficulty in establishing the date as a period of 20 years, having 1680 as its beginning. Yeah, I agree with that too, but there's been many cataclysms, so who knows? I have knowledge of ruins belonging to the lost race in question, into which lava flowed so long ago that channels of erosion have been cut through or into it 40 feet in depth. I have in my possession lava belonging to this same lava flow that has run onto corn in the ear. The corn now embedded in the lava. Standing corn embedded in lava. It would, I think, require a good deal of credulity to believe that these channels of erosion and lava, the petrifaction of these trees, the corn, could have occurred in 210 years. So yeah, he's just arguing with this guy's time frame here, but who knows, you guys, because we're dealing with several races built on top of each other, and several cataclysms being the destruction of each of those. Professor Agassiz calls America the mother of continents. Absolutely. This is now like the fourth writer who's said the same thing, right? The mother of continents. I believe she was also the mother of mankind and of civilization. The lava that created Table Mountain and covered the Calaveras Skull. Now, remember, we talked about Calaveras. It was the home of one of the largest forests of trees left in America. 150 feet down, they found a skull of a giant, one of the oldest skeletons ever found in the world. Again, I don't necessarily agree with the time frames, but we're talking about civilization on top of civilization on top of civilization, right? That's where we're at. 3 or 4 civilizations deep. And this skull was found 100 feet below this. If you haven't seen my California video, you need to go see it. I show video or images of the Calaveras forest where the trees are giants. They're thousands of years old, 1,000+ years old, right? And this skull was found hundreds of feet below this, right? Not to mention Calaveras County is where we're finding 50-foot horses. Okay? We're finding 50-foot horses with saddles as big as mining carts on their backs. If you haven't seen my California video, please go back and check it out. I'll be clipping some of that to come. The skull is now admitted to belong to the Miocene period of geology, and when that flowed, 16,000 feet of the Himalayan mountains and all of Egypt was under the sea. Yeah, America is the mother of continents. That man in the comparative state of civilization was contemporaneous in New Mexico with the Calaveras man of California, I think will yet be proved 100%. So what he's saying is that the Calaveras man and these ancient people of Mexico were contemporaneous, living side by side. Yeah. And that was thousands and thousands of years ago. I mean, what had to have happened for this man to be buried hundreds of feet below a forest that is absolutely gigantic? Huge, huge trees. All gone. So yeah, love that druidical place of worship, standing stones, the eyrie, as we were saying, it's here. So yeah, thank you again, everybody. Calaveras means skulls. Yeah, I believe it. Yeah. The largest petrified skeletons I've ever found in articles are from Calaveras and from that part of California. And they're titanic. They're huge. Not only that, many of these petrified animals and men were petrified into all these different minerals. They found a petrified man of gigantic proportions, 18+ feet, who had been turned into silver and quartz. He had been crystallized, and who knows what they did with him. But the mining, the quote gold rush of the 1840s in California, where they were doing all that hydraulic mining, washing away entire mountains, they were finding unbelievable things. I mean, I don't think that it had anything to do with gold whatsoever. I think they were looking for relics in this ancient race. That's what I believe. They already knew the keys of mineralogy. They knew giant trees are full of all these minerals, all these biological life forms, when petrified, to become the mineral kingdom that we talk about. The mining industry of today is mining titans. That's all it is. Mining giant trees and giant men, women, and animals of previous ages. We're getting low on time. I'm going to I've got whole articles here, so I want to pick some of my favorites. Okay, this one's really important. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay, you guys see that okay? Maria Josepha, church bell, cast in the year 1355. Okay, really important. What have we been saying? Okay, the Spanish, their earliest church, mid 1500s. Whoops. Whoops. Even you'll find as we get into this article, they're like, "Oh boy, they can't even explain this." They show it. And what else is funny is the early Spanish explorers searching for the city of the seven cities of gold. They were given the gift by the quote, Montezuma Indians. They were giving a bell. They were giving a bell as a gift. These people were making bells. Okay, the Spanish, you know, they may have built their churches, but they're built on the ruins of ancient civilizations, as we've been saying. And here's a perfect example. Oh, we found this bell, and this is published 1904, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Bells for the use of churches have been known to be used in Italy as early as AD 400. They were introduced in France a century later. The Great Bell of Moscow, the largest in the world, was cast in 1733, weighing 444,000 pounds, so heavy it could not have ever been hung or swung. We're going to skip ahead a little bit. The history of Maria Josepha Bell must be largely presumed down to the last 100 years. Its name date of its casting appear in raised letters on its side and the protrusion of a cross. Now, we talked about the cross being a sacred symbol, that its origins and age come from America. Peruvian crosses, Mexican crosses have been found that are far older than anything in Europe. Again, because of time, I'm going to do a synopsis. The ancient relic came from, or its history previous to its discovery in New Mexico, is problematic. Oh, yeah, it is problematic. Absolutely. The history of church bells in New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado. Okay, this Archbishop of Santa Fe, he wrote this article. He's even saying it. Okay, this is an archbishop, Catholic bishop, saying, "Oh, this bell, this is problematic." Oh, yeah, because this bell predates the earliest church. Right here it says 1530, 1540. It is known 3 expeditions were made into New Mexico, or Cibola. Remember, the ancient name of New Mexico was Cibola. And yeah, so 200 years predating, okay, bells being used. Yeah, I mean, all of the buildings in Tenochtitlan and the earliest arrival of Cortez in Mexico, all the buildings had bells. They said the bells were ringing all the time. Of course. So perfect. I just love that, because even the bishop's like, this is problematic. This is a problem, you guys. What are we going to do about this bell? It's 200 years before we got here. What are we going to tell people? Okay, I like this one. This is from 1853. Again, some of the oldest articles are some of the best, right? Monroe County, PA, 1853. Ruins in New Mexico. Again, I'm going to kind of breeze through these. I know I did a lot of rambling in the beginning, but hopefully you're enjoying the episode. We got probably about 10, maybe 15 more minutes here. At a recent meeting of the Ruins in New Mexico, 1853. At a recent meeting of the Maryland Historical Society, a letter dated Fort Filmer, New Mexico, January 15th, 1853, Colonel D.S. Mile of the United States Army was read and excited a very deep and lively interest among the members present. The material portion of the letter is as follows. Lieutenant Albert of the Topographical Engineers is the only officer of the Army that ever had the opportunity of visiting Gran Quivira. Now, Gran Quivira was also called the capital of New Granada. So, really interesting naming here. We've talked about some of the Moorish relations here. We're going to reveal an Ethiopian giant found in a riverbed, buried several feet below ground. And he was petrified, turned into stone. He went to a deserted village called Abo in latitude 34 degrees, 25 miles, longitude 106 west. And he says he was within 14 miles of it, and the direction was east. This may be correct, but my information would lead me to infer it lies further south. Since I wrote this article in the Arkansas paper, I have accidentally become acquainted with an old man named Campbell, who is represented as a respectable and truthful man who visited Quivira on 2 occasions. The first time in 1839, and he was run off by Indians. The next visit, 1842, with a larger party, and stayed there a week, exploring and digging around there for treasure. I will, as far as my memory permits, give you this description. He found the site of Guanquivira on a mesa or tableland situated on the northwest point of Sacramento Mountains. Now, remember what we talked about with mesa and tablelands. They built hundreds of miles in tunnels in the mesas. All these mesas, again, from a mineralogical standpoint, resemble trees. Okay. There's a very high probability just from a mineralogical standpoint. Forget everything else, fancy stories, whatever. From a mineralogical standpoint, these tablelands and mesas have the anatomical, mineralogical structure of giant trees. And they've carved hundreds of miles of tunnels in these trees. And much of the mining or ancient mining that they found here, the Spanish found ancient mines, hundreds of years old, and hundreds of miles of them. And they predominantly seem to be giant trees. The appearance of a large populous city, regularly laid out in wide streets and right angles. He supposes the city in length to be at least 3 miles and running northeast to southwest, and half a mile or more in breadth. Some of the houses, in part still standing, are built of hewn stone. Now, again, this is a problem, right? We're talking about adobe. Well, there's both. Okay, there's hewn stone and there's adobe. Several different cultures living in a similar area. We'll get into why this is important. There are clear indications of the size of the houses, and many of them are very large, or at least covered much ground. One he thought he recognized as the palace, another as the temple, or place of worship, and here he thought it was most probable he would find treasure. He sounded about and discovered a hollow place, cleaned away the dirt, and reached the floor, dug through it, thinking he was getting into a cellar, but found a room entirely empty, about 16 by 18 feet square, with polished walls and with paintings or colored figures all over it, and ascertained for the first time that he was then on the level with the street, which is now 10 or 15 feet below the surface. Okay, more correlations. What, the third article I've read where they talk about the buildings were buried, right? This man is saying, oh, I dug down, found a room, color figures, and ascertained for the first time that he was then, and this is an italicized, okay? This is italicized, that he was then on the level with the street, which is now 10 or 15 feet below the surface. He and the party used this room as a dwelling while at the place. He dug in another place, which he supposed to be at the altar, and he came to a flat rock. On clearing away the rubbish, he discovered where it had been excavated and nicely covered by a close-fitting hewn flat rock. He was sure of a prize and raised the rock and found in it, in a carved hole in the solid rock, the skeleton of a human body. Indian in appearance, the whole perfect, but which in a few moments, by exposure to the air, dissolved, not leaving a particle of evidence of a human corpse but fine dust. As we discussed with mica, sand, all these different things, that when you have giant petrifactions, gigantic organisms like trees will create a very fine dust, and sandstone and all these different things can be formed by this petrifaction. On digging further at the place, he found 4 vaults and human skeletons. He abandoned the town and went back to the hills and found a cave, but on opening the mouth, discovered it to be a shaft of a mine. This he followed for nearly a quarter of a mile, seeing throughout evidences of a shiny mineral on all sides. At the end of the shaft was a small chamber where he found a crowbar of some metal, but not of iron, quite black, a chisel, and a hammer, or kind of axe, also black, and a curious kind of earthen vessel. He left these things where he found them and returned to the town. In rambling around to the western part, he found what was the reservoir in the form of an ellipse. Its axis must have been 150 yards in length, its breadth 80, and its depth 50. This is quite a large reservoir of water, you guys. 150 yards by 80 yards, 50 feet deep, paved bottom, and the sides with hewn stone. No easy feat. At the southern end of the reservoir was a very large house of cut stone, several stories high, which seemed to have been a place of arms and intended as a guardhouse to defend this pond of water as, at regular intervals, There were long slits and a kind of porthole on the left in the wall. The walls are 4 feet thick. One corner, perhaps half, of this house is still standing. There is no water or wood near Gran Quivara. The whole country around for many miles is a desolate plain of sand. Yeah, desolate plain of sand. And remember, we were talking about the cedars of Lebanon, the biblical cedars of Lebanon. Everything in this area is built of cedar and very finely cut cedar. At the northern end of the reservoir, the aqueduct comes in. This he followed to the White Mountains 40 miles. Okay, we're dealing with unbelievable canal work, aqueducts, waterworks. This is a 40-mile aqueduct from the White Mountains that leads to a stone-hewn reservoir, stone buildings, 4 feet thick. It is throughout its length faced with small cut stone, not brick, both on the sides and bottom, and cemented, similar to what we were talking about with the millions upon millions upon millions of cobblestone aqueducts in Arizona that were baked, right? Baked and could last for centuries. In width, it is about 12 feet and about 10 in depth, sufficient to carry a mountain stream. A mountain stream runs in it, owing to the obstruction of rubbish at its mouth, but which now persuades its course to the Pecos River. There is also a broad, paved avenue leading directly east from Gran Quivara, near 100 feet in width, which Mr. Campbell followed for 40 miles. And he left it supposing it to be a road which led to Texas. A stone paved road leading that was 100 feet in width. Stone road, 100 feet in width, leading to Texas. About 20 miles from Gran Quivara on the northern side of this road, he found quite a large village in ruins. At Gran Quivara, there is an abundance of painted pottery and earthen vessels, but he found no metallic ones. Well, in the mine, he found metals of an exotic kind. He couldn't even describe what they were. He's finding Gran Quivara completely built of hewn stone, paved roads, 100 feet wide, hundreds of miles long. He followed it for 40 and said this thing goes all the way to Texas. We talked about a bell from the 1300s. We talked about digging 3 or 4 civilizations below ruins like this, finding the origins of the Tesian or red-haired race, druidical forest groves, right? Pottery that relates it to the Greeks, the Phoenicians, from Florida to the mounds of the Mississippi, all the way to Alaska, covered in the same iconography that we find all over the Mediterranean, in China, with mummies similar to those found all over the world. And as that author that we first stated in the first article, the Emperor Greenus, the origins and migrations of the Atlanteans. Want to fit a few more in here. Where was the one where we talked about who led here? This one is really important. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to it, though. It's a long one. It's 7 o'clock. Let's finish strong here. Again, love you guys. Thank you so much for being here. I have so much I didn't even get to touch on. I'll have to do a second or third video here, follow up later on this week. Yeah. Digging up of a buried city in New Mexico, excavations in the Rio Grande Valley, disclose marvels, a prehistoric town built like a beehive, a vanished race of people who lived like rats in holes, the Pueblo of stone lions, underground chambers communicating with the underworld. So much we didn't get a touch on. New Mexico mummy. Hunter's chance discovery suggests startling theories considering problems of vanished peoples. Yeah, startling problems because there's more Tahitian or red-haired mummies. I don't have time to read that whole one. Let's pick another old one. This one's really long, isn't it? Yep, it is. Again, I apologize not being able to cover all this material, but this is what it's like with every episode, you guys. I just have so much. So I think I'll finish with this one. This one's from the 1850s. It's New Mexico. A curious relics of prehistoric races, ruins of buildings and aqueducts. I think this one's very similar. So maybe let's go back to Twitter and let's talk about this one real quick. American copper deposits. Okay. We'll kind of finish off on a, kind of out there. You guys hear me talk about, petrified titans and, the movie Avatar I mentioned a lot. But yeah, this one's really good. And just, kind of let your mind wander as I read this and, kind of think about what the world may have been like, a few epochs ago. Mexican copper deposit, a wonderful story of discoveries now to the science of mineralogy. Wonderful stories are those that come from New Mexico concerning an excitement over mineral discoveries said to have been made in the vicinity of the ancient Spanish mission in Abiquin. It was established in 1550. The copper deposits, which are now attracting so much attention, are said to have been worked for 20 years until 1599. The Spaniards were driven out of the country by natives. This was the result of an uprising of the part of the natives who had been made peons or slaves by the conquerors and forced to work on the copper deposits. Numerous old tunnels and the ruins of an old furnace are regarded as confirmatory proof of the legends regarding operations there in the early days of the Spanish invasion and occupation of the country. Abiquin is 50 or 60 miles northwest of Santa Fe, and the nearest railway joint being Espanola, and the southern terminus of the New Mexico branch of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. From Escuana to Abiquin, the distance is 30 miles to the west. All manners of stories regarding the nature and importance of these deposits are current. One of these is reproduced. Something entirely new to the science of mineralogy has been unearthed during the last 6 months. It is a forest of logs petrified into rich copper ore that averages 60% copper and 30 to 40 ounces of silver to the ton. Now, this is incredible, you guys, okay? A forest of logs petrified into rich copper ore that averages 60% copper. Okay, all the different trees, they mineralize into different minerals at different rates. These ones, 60% copper, 30 to 40 ounces of silver to the ton. Now, we've talked about finding petrified men and animals that were turned into quartz and copper and silver and gold. The logs seem to have floated in some kind of a mineral solution, evidently in the Carboniferous, a sediment of conglomerate, pebbles, and calcareous mat settled between them, dividing them as they are now found. This is where it gets really interesting if it isn't already. This seam of conglomerate is about 30 feet thick and extends on both sides of the canyon, a distance of 8 miles each way. So there are 16 miles of copper bearing seam filled thousands of feet back with copper logs. 16 miles, thousands of feet wide, hundreds of feet thick of petrified logs. This is some kind of a flood, you guys. Something happened, knocked all these trees over, or a plasma storm or something petrified the trees, and then they were all knocked over. 16 miles long, thousands of feet wide, hundreds of feet thick. 16 miles, thousands of feet, the 600 feet deep. So there's 600 feet of sand and rock above this formation. Okay, 600 feet of sand and rock above this petrified forest. Some of the logs have already yielded over 2 carloads each, and there are logs over 4 feet thick. At first, it was thought that the little branches and knots of the trees were only small pockets of copper, and a little attention was paid to the canyon. It was only when its true nature was discovered that it began to boom, and now full of prospectors, many of whom have already several carloads of ore to ship. Incredible destruction, petrifactions, a river of petrified trees, 16 miles long, thousands of feet wide, covered by 600 feet of sand and rock, where they're finding trees that are 60% copper. Unbelievable. Okay. Unbelievable. So, yeah, we're out of time. Um, it's time to get everyone ready for school. Love you guys. Thank you for being here. I'm going to try, as time permits this week, to put a few more of these articles into video form because there are many more full of much juice. So, keep an eye on the channel. If you don't follow me on Twitter, you should. I repost a bunch. Um, the show notes always include these articles. And, there's one more here. No, we won't even bother. We talk about the Star Fort, Fort Union. Okay, this is a star fort here in New Mexico. It's called Fort Union. It's buried. It goes 20, 30, 40 feet below ground. And similar to what was going on in Utah with the Danites and the Mormon militia fighting against the U.S. government, fighting against the Union, Santa Fe, the star fort here, was taken at night by the governor of Santa Fe, and the Union soldiers were driven from it. So lots of really interesting correlations. What was going on during the Civil War? Yeah, so we could go all day. But thank you again, you guys, so much for being here. Means a lot to me. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode, and stay tuned for Radium series, full episode 1. It's going to be a good one. I already have 2 preview videos out, and they're flipping awesome. I love them. Those are also going to be worked into the first full episode. We're going to talk about the history, the foundings of the mineral, who was involved, why I think there's a bit of a cover up with what they already knew, some of the mythological gods that were metaphors for the mineral kingdom, and myth is metaphor for what I think are the elements and these different minerals and what they do. Mercury, you already know mercury, right? Well, raw and radium and all these things. So stay tuned for the radium episode. That's coming out later this week. Stay tuned throughout the day. I'll be chopping up some of this episode into smaller, digestible videos. I'm also going to be chopping up some of Alaska video today. So thank you all so much for being here. Stay tuned for more. And anything you'd like to share or comment, please do so. I do read the comments, I read them all. So love you guys. Radium is Philosopher's Stone. Yeah, Tonavi, thanks for being here. I agree. It is. It transmutes all. Not only that, but when you put crystals around radium, the crystals absorb the radium. Crystals are batteries. They're laser technology. This goes back to Atlantis. Radium, I think, was the secret powerhouse of this Atlantean culture, and all of these aeronautic cultures were using radium. So, yeah, stay tuned. Love you guys. Thank you so much for joining me this early hour. It means a lot. And stay tuned. Have a wonderful, wonderful Tuesday, and I'll see you all very soon. Have a great one. Bye.